Neither my lawyer Astachov nor I could refuse a meeting in Florence with Antonio Paluchi, despite knowing that Paluchi would not engage in honest negotiations due to a conflict of interest. Therefore, I decided that although the meeting was inevitable, our lawyer Astachov would attend the meeting with Paluchi alone, and we would not bring Cellini's self-portrait to Italy. I had heard a lot about how cunning the Florentines are, and how skillfully they conduct their intrigues. Thus, firstly, I was curious to see how deep this rabbit hole went. I was interested in learning something new from the patented Florentine schemers. Secondly, if our confrontation was inevitable, then according to the rules of street fights, we should confront the biggest and toughest bully in the yard, rather than avoiding the fight. On the morning of May 20th, Astachov went to Paluchi's office at the appointed time, and an hour and a half later, he called me because the meeting had ended. I do not want to say that Paluchi was always a clinical idiot, but on that day, May 20th, 2005, he behaved exactly like that. Firstly, as soon as Paluchi found out that Astachov came without the painting, he became furious and couldn't control his anger. The absence of the painting itself provoked the Godfather's rage. Secondly, he insulted the lawyer, calling him an insect and humiliating him in various ways. Attacking a lawyer, or any envoy for that matter, is foolish in itself. It's like biting the stick you're being poked with. Unfortunately, I found no trace of the mythical Florentine intelligence in Antonio Paolucci's behavior. Moreover, Astachov is a foreigner, a guest in Florence, and the Maltese knights had invited him into their home. Therefore, they should have treated the guest decently. The Maltese order is even called the Hospitaller Order. According to the Mafia Code of Conduct accepted in Italy, outsiders should be treated with respect, but Paluchi also failed to follow this rule. Thirdly, Paluchi declared to my lawyer that our painting had no value because it was made in the 19th century and had nothing to do with Benvenuto Cellini, his works, or artists contemporary to Cellini. In other words, Paluchi was consciously and blatantly lying to the lawyer's face. Paluchi was a professional in this field, while Astachov was an amateur. Lying by a professional to an amateur is considered an aggravating circumstance or a crime punishable in court. A professional does not have the right to use his knowledge to deceive an amateur in a transaction or negotiation. This is a criminal offense. Moreover, Paluchi had never seen the portrait or the material examinations. He had only seen photographs, and previously, based on these same photographs, he had recognized the self-portrait as authentic. In other words, Paluchi had no grounds for his conclusions, which he made solely to deceive Astachov. And finally, fourthly, in his tirade, Paluchi solemnly declared us TERRA BRUCIATA. This term, TERRA BRUCIATA, literally translates from Italian as Scorched Earth. This method is widely used by the mafia in Italy. For example, if you have a house and want to sell it, but the local mafiosi declare it terra bruciata, no one will buy your house even for pennies, because buyers will face problems later. In our case, terra bruciata meant that from then on, we would neither be able to sell the portrait nor appraise it, and we wouldn't be able to do anything with it at all. Most ordinary Italians are actually quite fearful. They are constantly wary of the trouble that the mafia or the Freemasons might cause them. Therefore, threats like terra bruciata work very effectively in Italy. Moreover, on the same day, Astachov became the victim of a robbery in Florence, and based on his account, he filed a report with the Florentine police on May 25, 2005. In other words, Paluchi committed several crimes simultaneously, disregarding caution and moral norms. In general, Paluchi behaved like the leader of a small street gang, clearly overestimating his capabilities. It was also obvious that Paluchi did not consider Astachov and me as people at all. Probably Paluchi allowed himself such an attitude because we are Russian, and Paluchi had never dealt with Russians before. He likely viewed us as some sort of savages who wouldn't be able to distinguish the Mona Lisa from Van Gogh. I think Paluchi was used to despising everyone around him because he considered himself the smartest. Sycophants and flatterers convinced this rather average-minded person that he was a genius. Fast-forwarding a bit, I'll say that from this extreme point in their worldview, Paluchi and his deranged associates swung to the opposite extreme a few years later. From disdain for us, they shifted to fierce conspiracy theories, imagining us as some mighty order and a conspiracy. After facing resistance from us, they decided they were dealing with a powerful and secretive organization unknown to them, with me merely serving as the frontman. When the art cartel moved from initial contempt to conspiracy theories, its representatives began behaving even more strangely, engaging in bizarre actions like sending messages encrypted in Hollywood films. We'll discuss this amusing phenomenon later, and I'll show you how it happened with facts and comments. In any case, I didn't witness any of the famous Florentine intelligence and beautiful intrigues on May 20th, 2005. The godfather of the art cartel turned out to be an unhealthy old man with an overly inflated ego who clearly overestimated his strength and importance. Nevertheless, it seems Astachov was indeed frightened by the Italians. Immediately upon returning to Moscow, he cited health problems and stopped working on the case. However, there may be another version that explains Astachov's behavior. Perhaps the lawyer realized that the portrait couldn't be sold, and thus there was no prospect of getting more money than he had already received from me, making it pointless to continue working on the case. Since I had fully paid Astachov his substantial fee, amounting to several tens of thousands of dollars, he still felt obligated to fulfill my request. Before ending our relationship, I asked Astachov to obtain a written statement signed by Paluchi himself. I needed material evidence of this foolish lie from Superintendent Antonio Paluchi with his personal signature. Fulfilling my request, Astachov from Moscow, using his connections, pressured Paluchi, and he sent Astachov this letter, which you see before you on the screen. Here, in his document on official letterhead, Paluchi mixed up the dates, but that's not important. The main thing is that this letter has a signature and is registered as outgoing. This document, which you now see before you, later became a nightmare for Paluchi because it compromised him until his death. Literally, it says the following. Florence, May 23, 2005. Dear lawyer, as I already told you personally during our meeting on May 20, 2005, the painting that I examined from a photograph labeled as the portrait of Benvenuto Cellini is a quality work done in the second half of the 19th century. Therefore, it is excluded that it has anything to do with Cellini or the style of the artists who were his contemporaries. With best wishes, I beg you to believe me. Antonio Paluchi. This is the document. This letter is also interesting from a professional standpoint because it was written by someone with obviously weak scientific qualifications. Imagine a situation where I had to dispute Paluchi's conclusions in court. The judge, of course, understands nothing about stylistic analysis of artworks, and therefore Paluchi, relying on his authority, is confident that he can convince the judge of his correctness. However, modern methods of analyzing the materials that make up a painting allow us to use gas chromatography to precisely identify the pigments the artist used. For instance, if we find a pigment like lead tin yellow, chemical formula Pb2SNO4, among these pigments, it would immediately disprove all of Paluchi's fabrications about the 19th century and his stylistic analysis. The fact is that this beautiful yellow pigment was widely used in the 16th century and forgotten in the 17th century. This pigment was replaced by another yellow pigment known as Naples yellow. However, the formula for lead tin yellow was rediscovered by the German researcher Richard Jacobi only in 1941. Therefore, even the most corrupt judge in the world would clearly understand that if this pigment is found in both the lower and upper paint layers of the painting, it means the painting could not have been created in either the first or second half of the 19th century. In other words, it becomes evident that Paluchi is either lying or grossly mistaken. I fully admit that the godfather of the art cartel simply did not know about modern analytical methods because, unfortunately, the overall level of expertise in our field is very low in our days. I have given just one example for illustration, but we will examine the issues of objective methods for art examination in more detail in the following videos. Subscribe to my channel, dear friends, as it will only get more interesting from here.